Let's spend a few minutes talking about break-even analysis, a very important topic for any business plan. At what point will my sales be the same as my expenses? Is essentially what to think of with the business with the break-even. This is a picture of a break-even analysis. Obviously, you start out with a loss generally. Most businesses, once they begin to sell, are selling at a loss. The expenses exceed revenues. But at some point, as you begin to sell more units and you streamline your costs and whatnot, you will then hit the break-even point, which is where your expenses and revenues are exactly the same. You have zero net loss or zero net revenue. They're exactly the same. And the goal, of course, is to then begin to sell more units to the point where you have now sales exceeding expenses and you have profits. So just a good visualization of what that means. So then when will I reach the break-even point? Well, it depends on several factors. Of course, as you are writing a business plan, there's many things you have to consider about reaching the break-even point, and some of those things would include the topics on the next screen, which are fixed costs, variable costs, and so on. So fixed costs are typically known. Quite often those can be estimated with relatively good accuracy. So typically we know what those amounts are. Think of things like rent or a lease payment, your insurance. Costs that are the same no matter what in terms of the amount of sales that we have. So a fixed cost, the amount of sales we have doesn't change them. They're locked in. Quite often we know what they are because we signed a contract. I have a lease. I now have insurance contract to pay, things like that. The variable costs, though, are harder to estimate. We have to estimate them, and that is basically what will it cost me to make my product every time I sell one. So no matter what the product is, if we pick up something as simple as we're making a cell phone, every time I make one, I incur a certain amount of labor, a certain amount of parts that I have to buy and assemble, and so on. So as I make something, that's a variable cost. Every time I make it, I incur that cost. It could be something like a sales commission. Just anything that's a variable, I only incur that cost if I make the product. Then we also have to estimate revenues, and the hardest part with revenues is how many units will I sell, what will my pricing be, and so on. Now, when it comes to doing estimates of break-even, be realistic with the numbers. We should have a really good handle on the fixed costs. With the variable costs, if we're going to estimate, which we have to do, estimate high. You want to have a cushion, so estimate those costs being more than you might think they really will be. Same thing with the revenues. Be conservative with the revenues. Kind of think of what's the most likely realistic scenario that I expect to happen, and then maybe even dial that down a little bit from that point, but be realistic with the numbers and be a bit conservative with the revenue side. And then your price point. Well, what will the pricing be? What will it be now? What will it be in the future as you calculate future revenues? So the price I charge today may be a very different price I charge 6 months from now or a year from now as I am able to streamline my costs and so on. So just some things to consider and think about in terms of break-even. In Chapter 6, pages 98, 99 are right there. There's also a couple of links in the module for week 3 that will explain break-even a little bit for you also. And of course, just do a Google search and do your own research too, and you'll find plenty of topics about break-even. As always, if you have questions, just let me know.